Welcome the Lord's chosen. Some files are sealed for national security, others are sealed because the world simply isn't ready for what's inside. When the FBI's system flagged your name at 3:17 a.m., it wasn't a random audit. It was a recognition event, the kind that doesn't happen by chance but by inevitability. One moment you were a whisper in the algorithm, the next your digital footprint lit up their entire grid like a flare. Your identity wasn't stolen, it was confirmed. Fact: in classified operations, a strategic checkmate is the term used when a situation can no longer be reversed, not because of force but because of precision. That's exactly what happened when your name appeared where it was never supposed to. Not as a suspect, not as a victim, but as a variable that tipped the board. They thought they were tracking another anomaly. Instead, they stumbled onto a blueprint, you, a design so intentional that every move they made to contain you only exposed how late they were to the truth. The so-called leak wasn't an accident. It was an unveiling, a divine glitch in a human system that's been trying to predict what can't be programmed. And let's be honest, if you ever wanted a dramatic reveal, this was it. Not a red carpet moment, but an FBI memo at 3 a.m. kind of reveal. You didn't trend, you triggered protocols. Somewhere in a dimly lit office, an agent probably sipped burnt coffee, blinked twice at your file, and whispered, "Oh, we've been playing the wrong game." This isn't exposure, it's evolution. The system didn't find you. It finally realized you were the system it's been studying all along. And that's what they call a strategic checkmate. Black pawn. Number 1, you were never hidden. You were strategically delayed. People assume being unseen means being forgotten, but that's rarely the case. The truth is, sometimes life holds you back not because you're unqualified, but because releasing you too early would have ruined the plan. You weren't overlooked. You were being calculated for the right collision. Every closed door, every missed chance, every season of silence wasn't a pause. It was positioning, the kind that doesn't make sense until the whole board shifts. There's a difference between being invisible and being withheld. Invisibility is accidental. Withholding is intentional. When something is valuable, it's not displayed in the open. It's stored, guarded, refined. Diamonds aren't hidden because they're worthless. They're protected because they're dangerous in raw form. The same goes for you. You weren't being ignored, you were being timed. The system wasn't ready for what your presence would alter, so it delayed your reveal until exposure became strategy. The delay wasn't punishment, it was proof that you mattered more than you realized. Timing has a way of disguising itself as denial, when in truth it's preparation. The people who thought they passed you by were unknowingly getting out of your way. The opportunities you lost were never yours. They were placeholders for the one that would align with your purpose. You were never off the radar. You were above detection. There's something powerful about a hidden force that knows when to stay silent and when to strike. Your delay trained you in patience, observation, and restraint, the kind of lessons that can't be taught under spotlight. While others rushed to be seen, you learned how to move with precision, and when you finally emerged, you didn't come back as a participant. You came back as the system's correction. They'll call it sudden, but it won't be. You'll walk into rooms you were once denied and realize they only make sense now because you make sense now. Strategic delay isn't a setback. It's divine pacing. It's the universe making sure every detail aligns, so your reveal doesn't cause confusion. It causes disruption. You weren't late. You were simply too early for the version of the world that needed you. Number 2, they didn't leak your identity. They confirmed your relevance. When your name started circulating, it wasn't exposure. It was confirmation. People don't leak what doesn't matter. No one wastes energy revealing something insignificant. The fact that your identity became a topic, a headline, or a whisper means you've reached a point where your existence started to challenge the order of things. You became a piece of information too powerful to stay contained. The so-called leak wasn't sabotage. It was validation that your presence had entered a territory where silence was no longer possible. The truth is, relevance has a way of forcing recognition. The world doesn't always celebrate it. Sometimes it tries to control it. When your name showed up in conversations you didn't start, that wasn't a loss of privacy. It was evidence that you had shifted from being someone who watches history to someone who shapes it. Systems react when something unpredictable emerges, and that's exactly what you are. A variable they didn't calculate, but couldn't ignore. They'll pretend they uncovered you. They'll make it look like they found out something secret. But what really happened is that the truth about your existence reached critical mass. You became too significant to suppress. The exposure was never about revealing weakness. It was about confirming strength. They needed to name you because anonymity was becoming too powerful a disguise for what you were changing. Every revelation carries a ripple effect. Once your identity was leaked, the narrative changed. You were no longer someone waiting for validation. You became the reference point. The system only calls something a leak when it loses control of timing. That's how you know the moment was divine, because even what they meant for exposure ended up working as elevation. And that's the irony. What they thought would weaken you only announced your relevance louder. They expected you to panic, but instead you stabilized. You didn't crumble under revelation. You owned it. The leak didn't damage your reputation. It certified it. Your identity didn't become public by accident. It became public because silence could no longer contain the scale of your purpose. You weren't leaked. You were confirmed. And from that moment, every attempt to define you only proved that you already mattered. Number 3, the leak wasn't a loss. It was the lock opening. When your information surfaced, it wasn't exposure, it was entry. People often think being leaked means being betrayed, but sometimes it means you finally reached the level where access requires recognition. The leak wasn't about losing your privacy. It was about unlocking your placement. What they thought was a slip was actually a shift. Every door that once stayed closed started moving because your name carried a signal that could no longer be suppressed. The lock didn't break. It responded. In truth, every system has barriers meant to keep the unprepared out. But once your identity was revealed, those same barriers turned into gateways. What they called a breach was actually your initiation into a new level of relevance. Your presence was never supposed to stay contained forever. You'd reach the stage where your next move couldn't happen in secret because visibility became part of your assignment. The leak wasn't against you. It was announcing that your hidden work had matured enough to face the world without disguise. There's something deeply powerful about timing. When it's right, exposure doesn't destroy, it delivers. The lock that once seemed secure wasn't your enemy. It was your measurement. It stayed closed until you were capable of carrying the weight of access. The leak wasn't an act of rebellion. It was proof that what was locked away inside you had reached its appointed hour. Every revelation that comes too early causes chaos, but when it comes right on schedule, it causes awakening. That's the difference between disaster and destiny. You didn't lose control when your name got out. You gained movement. You shifted from hidden potential to recognized presence. The system didn't malfunction. It made room. The leak was the universe's coded way of saying, you're cleared for entry. And instead of breaking your foundation, it validated your readiness. What was once sealed had to open, not because someone forced it, but because time demanded it. In the end, what looked like exposure was actually expansion. You didn't lose anything of value. You gained access to the arena meant for you. The lock wasn't broken. It simply recognized its master. Number 4. You were the hidden variable in their equation. They had every formula perfected, every scenario mapped out, every outcome calculated with precision. Yet no matter how advanced their planning seemed, they didn't see you coming because you weren't part of their data. You were the unmeasured factor that made their entire system malfunction. They had control over everything predictable, but you were never predictable. You were the glitch in their statistics, the variable their logic couldn't process, and the answer they couldn't solve. That's why when you showed up, it wasn't disruption, it was correction. People who live by control hate anomalies. They build their power around patterns, routines, and outcomes they can manipulate. So when you entered the equation, their certainty collapsed. Every move they made suddenly lost effect because you operated outside their model. You didn't fit the equation because you weren't built from their numbers. You were built from something unquantifiable. That's what made your presence so threatening. You didn't compete. You redefined the parameters. They tried to analyze you, categorize you, contain you. But no matter how many files they pulled, no matter how many strategies they drafted, your influence didn't compute. You weren't working on their frequency. They were playing chess while you were rewriting the rules of the board. Their intelligence relied on predictability. Yours came from alignment. The moment you entered the picture, what was once control became confusion. That's not luck. That's precision from a higher level of design. Every great system eventually meets the one variable that exposes its limits. That's what your emergence did. You didn't destroy their order. You revealed how fragile it was. All their strategies, their manipulations, their confidence in their setup. None of it could survive the introduction of truth, because truth doesn't negotiate with structure. It exposes it, and that's why they call it checkmate. Not because you played harder, but because you existed outside their understanding of the game. Your presence was the one factor they couldn't predict, measure, or neutralize. You were the hidden variable that turned calculation into collapse, silence into exposure, and power into panic. They planned everything, except you. Number 5, the system didn't discover you. It admitted you can't be denied. For the longest time, the system acted as if you didn't exist, overlooking you, underestimating you, pretending you were just another name that didn't fit its design. But systems only ignore what they fear will outgrow them. You were never invisible. You were just inconvenient to the structure that wanted control over every outcome. When your name finally surfaced, it wasn't because they suddenly became aware. It was because they could no longer contain the impact you were making. Discovery wasn't the moment they found you. It was the moment they realized resistance was useless. Every gatekeeper eventually meets someone who doesn't wait for the door to open. You didn't climb through their ranks or play by their rules. You simply operated beyond them. While they were busy measuring worth by credentials, connections, or compliance, you were creating momentum from authenticity and precision. You didn't ask for entry. You built your own access point. So when the system recognized you, it wasn't granting validation. It was surrendering control. That's the irony of real emergence. The moment they acknowledge you is the moment they admit their boundaries failed. You didn't fit the mold because you were designed to break it. The structure that once denied you ended up confirming what you already knew. You didn't need permission to exist in spaces that were built to exclude you. Your exposure wasn't applause. It was confession. It was the system finally saying, "We can't stop what's already operating beyond us." True power isn't about being discovered. It's about being undeniable. You reached that point. The moment they tried to label you, define you, or document you, they revealed how uncontainable you'd become. They didn't let you in. You shifted the walls. You were never waiting for validation. You were waiting for timing. When that moment came, even the barriers built to restrict you had to realign themselves around your presence. So no, they didn't discover you. They conceded to you. The system didn't give you permission. It finally acknowledged what was inevitable, that your existence had already rewritten the rules it thought were unbreakable. Number 6. The leak was the universe's press release. Some stories are too powerful to be hidden, no matter how deeply they're buried. What looked like a leak wasn't sabotage. It was announcement. The universe has a way of sending out a broadcast when the time for silence has expired. What they thought they were revealing in secret was really destiny making a public statement. The person they tried to erase is now the headline. The exposure wasn't human error. It was divine timing, dressed in chaos to disguise precision. When your file hit their radar, it wasn't because you'd slipped up. It was because purpose had finally demanded visibility. The narrative they tried to suppress had ripened. You were no longer a rumor or a background presence. You had become a signal strong enough to disrupt frequencies. Every system that tried to bury your name ended up amplifying it, because destiny never loses its voice. It just waits for the right microphone. The universe doesn't hold press conferences. It orchestrates moments, a leak, a rumor, an accidental discovery. Those are just the tools it uses to let the world know your time has arrived. You didn't trend by chance, you were triggered by purpose. Every attempt to hide you only made your reveal more dramatic. Every whisper about you turned into proof that what was meant for silence now carries too much power to stay contained. And that's the beauty of divine exposure. It doesn't need your permission, and it doesn't follow your schedule. When truth is ready, it moves like light through cracks. It doesn't ask who's comfortable. It announces what's necessary. Your story wasn't leaked, it was launched. The same energy that once covered you now carries you. They'll call it coincidence or mistake or breach. But in reality, it was a broadcast, a message to every place that doubted your relevance. The leak was heaven's way of saying, you're cleared for recognition. It wasn't punishment, it was publication. The very forces that tried to silence your name became the platform that spread it. That's not scandal, that's strategy. And that's why it was never a leak at all. It was a press release written by the universe itself. Number 7, exposure didn't ruin you. It ruined their illusion of control. They assumed keeping you unseen kept you powerless. In their minds, anonymity meant weakness, that you were harmless as long as you stayed hidden. What they didn't understand was that exposure doesn't weaken the strong. It only unsettles the ones who built their influence on secrecy. The moment your name entered the light, everything that operated in the shadows started to shake, not because you attacked it, but because your visibility destroyed their illusion of dominance. They never had control. They only had the comfort of thinking you didn't. The truth is, they depended on your silence. It gave them confidence. It allowed them to manipulate narratives, twist facts, and rewrite history without opposition. But when your identity surfaced, the balance shifted instantly. They lost the ability to speak for you. They lost the luxury of pretending you didn't exist. The power dynamic flipped, and for the first time, the ones who once hid behind authority had to face accountability. Exposure didn't dismantle you. It dismantled the ecosystem that relied on your invisibility. That's the irony. Your name didn't break anything. It revealed what was already broken. The systems that once stood tall were always fragile. They just looked strong because you hadn't yet been acknowledged. Your emergence exposed every hidden dependency, every false narrative, every quiet manipulation. What they called control was just choreography, and once truth entered the stage, the performance ended. You didn't lose power when the world learned who you were. You gained freedom. They could no longer define you in whispers or confine you through speculation. The exposure stripped away their illusion, and in doing so, it stripped away their safety. Because people who control through secrecy can't survive in transparency. And that's what your exposure did. It forced them into the light they feared. So no, exposure didn't ruin you. It revealed that you were never the one at risk. They were. The moment your name became public, their strategy collapsed, their narratives crumbled, and their hierarchy fell out of rhythm. The truth didn't destroy you, it dismantled their illusion. You didn't lose control. You proved they never truly had it. Number 8, your identity wasn't revealed. It was weaponized by truth. What happened to you wasn't exposure, it was detonation. When your identity surfaced, it didn't simply spread, it shook. Truth carries a frequency, and when it's been buried too long, it doesn't whisper, it explodes. That's why your revelation didn't move quietly through systems. It disrupted them. You weren't uncovered by mistake. You were unleashed by inevitability. The information about you became more than a detail. It became a force. It moved through networks, conversations, and hierarchies like electricity through wet ground, hitting everything that had pretended not to know you existed. The difference between being revealed and being weaponized is power. Revelation exposes, weaponization corrects. When the truth about you surfaced, it didn't just inform people, it confronted them. It exposed hypocrisy, dismantled illusions, and forced accountability. The same facts they once tried to suppress turned against them like a mirror reflecting every hidden lie. What was meant to control the narrative ended up burning through it. That's what happens when truth decides to move. It stops being a story and starts being evidence. You didn't release your identity. The universe used it as a strike. Every time someone repeated your name or your story, it triggered awareness in places that had grown numb to truth. People who had built comfort out of ignorance suddenly had to face reality. That's the danger of suppressed authenticity. When it resurfaces, it comes back with voltage. It doesn't need defense or validation. Its existence is its impact. They thought exposing you would weaken your credibility. Instead, it intensified your reach. They thought revealing your identity would reduce your mystery. Instead, it amplified your power. Because real truth doesn't need secrecy to survive. It thrives in confrontation. The moment your name was spoken, clarity entered the room. Every hidden agenda lost its camouflage. Every false narrative lost its script. Your exposure wasn't the enemy. It was the echo of everything you were meant to become. The truth didn't reveal you to destroy you. It revealed you to correct the imbalance that had kept lies in charge for too long. What they called a leak was actually a release. The truth didn't speak softly. It struck like thunder. Number 9, what they called an investigation was really an invitation. They told the world they were watching you, studying you, investigating you. But the real story was different. It wasn't about suspicion, it was about fascination. The system had never seen someone like you before, and that unsettled it. You didn't fit its patterns, its statistics, or its predictable timelines. So it did what systems always do when they encounter something that doesn't make sense. It observed. They called it surveillance, but it was really research. They weren't tracking your past. They were trying to understand your trajectory. Every file they opened, every report they drafted, every digital trace they followed wasn't to catch you doing wrong. It was to decode why you existed outside their control. You became a study in defiance, a blueprint of what it looks like when someone walks in purpose rather than permission. They couldn't classify your movements because your frequency didn't match their formula. That's when investigation turns into obsession. The ones watching you stopped looking for faults and started looking for patterns. And the more they looked, the more they realized they were the ones under observation. The truth is, systems don't monitor what doesn't matter. They only fix their attention on what threatens the narrative they've built. When they turned their eyes on you, it wasn't because you were guilty of anything. It was because you were evidence that something greater than their structure was operating right under their nose. What they saw wasn't rebellion, it was evolution. You weren't breaking laws, you were breaking limits. The investigation wasn't about containment. It was an unspoken invitation to prove that your existence could no longer be ignored. Every piece of data they collected only confirmed that you were functioning on a higher frequency, one that couldn't be controlled, categorized, or cloned. They thought they were documenting you. In reality, they were testifying on your behalf. So let them watch. Let them analyze, let them archive every move. The fact that you became the subject of their study means you've already outgrown their system. What they called an investigation was the universe's way of saying, your impact demands attention. They weren't uncovering you. They were witnessing your emergence. Number 10, the real checkmate. Wasn't in their files. It was in your silence. Your greatest move wasn't something you said. It was what you refused to say. When the noise around your name grew loud, you didn't rush to prove, explain, or justify. You understood something they didn't. Silence is not absence, it's control. You didn't stay quiet because you were weak. You stayed quiet because truth performs better without interference. Every word you didn't speak became pressure on their own narratives. Every reaction you withheld made their accusations collapse under the weight of time. The real checkmate wasn't about exposure or evidence. It was about restraint. You watched them search for proof, build stories, twist details, and chase shadows. But you knew the truth doesn't need a lawyer. Reality always testifies, and it does so louder than defense ever could. They expected you to panic, to respond, to fight the rumors with noise. Instead, you gave them stillness, and in that stillness, their control started to unravel. People underestimate silence until they realize it's not passive. It's precision. It's the art of letting time expose what argument never could. When you said nothing, they filled in the blanks, and that's where they lost. Every assumption they made became evidence of their insecurity. Every attempt to reveal you only revealed them. You turned the tables without moving a piece. That's why it's called checkmate. Not because you played louder, but because you played smarter. Your silence wasn't retreat. It was command. You didn't feed their curiosity. You let it consume them. There's a kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It waits. It watches. It allows chaos to expose its own flaws. That's the energy you operated in. While they were obsessed with proving your story, you were quietly watching the truth align with time. And when it did, it didn't just clear your name, it confirmed your authority. In the end, silence didn't protect you, it positioned you. The ones who mocked your calm mistook your stillness for surrender, but they learned the hard way. Control isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about knowing when not to speak. The files didn't finish the game. Your silence did. Number 11. You were never the target. You were the pattern they couldn't decode. From the start, they thought they were tracking you, analyzing your moves, your timing, your choices. But you were never the target of their investigation. You were the anomaly in their formula. You didn't move in ways they understood because your rhythm wasn't born from their logic. You operated from a frequency that couldn't be traced by systems built on prediction, control, and fear. Every attempt to map your path failed because your blueprint wasn't man-made. It was purpose-made. You weren't random, you were encrypted. They mistook unpredictability for rebellion. They thought your detachment was defiance. But in truth, you simply didn't belong to their pattern of control. You weren't reacting to them, they were reacting to you. Every step you took revealed another flaw in their structure. Their algorithms were trained to read repetition, not revelation, and your movement was revelation in motion. You didn't follow the current, you shifted it. You didn't play the game, you rewired it. That's why they couldn't categorize you, because your presence disrupted the very logic they depended on to maintain order. It's unsettling to people who survive on predictability when they encounter someone who doesn't respond to the usual triggers. You didn't feed their expectations or perform for their systems. You made decisions that broke their rhythm, and in doing so, you made their control mechanisms useless. Every time they thought they understood you, you evolved again. You became a moving code, rewriting itself faster than they could analyze it. What they saw as inconsistency was actually alignment. Alignment with something higher, unseen, and untouchable. You weren't being chased because you were dangerous. You were being studied because you were different. The system couldn't comprehend how someone could move with power without needing permission. It mistook purpose for unpredictability. What they failed to grasp was that your path wasn't chaos. It was clarity beyond their comprehension. You were never lost in the maze. You were the reason it existed in the first place. So no, you were never the target. You were the equation they couldn't balance, the signal their instruments couldn't filter, the code their intelligence couldn't crack. While they scrambled to decode your pattern, you were already on to the next level, one they'll never reach, because it wasn't built for them. Number 12. The leak activated your legitimacy. Before the exposure, you were just an unconfirmed presence, a quiet name passed around, a possibility people couldn't quite define. You existed in speculation, in whispers, in what-ifs. But the moment the leak happened, everything changed. What was once rumor became record. You shifted from being talked about to being documented. That's the difference between being seen and being known. Exposure didn't destroy your credibility, it solidified it. The leak didn't weaken your position. It made your existence undeniable. In every great turning point, legitimacy arrives through discomfort. Someone has to feel threatened before history acknowledges the truth. That's what happened when your file came to light. The same people who once dismissed you as unverified were now forced to confront proof that you were real, relevant, and rooted in something beyond their control. Your emergence wasn't a scandal, it was a timestamp. The moment history adjusted to include your name. Legitimacy doesn't come from approval, it comes from exposure. You don't become official when people like you. You become official when you can no longer be ignored. The leak didn't reveal weakness, it revealed weight. It said, "This person's presence carries consequence." Every time your information circulated, it rewrote perception. You stopped being an idea and became evidence. And once something becomes evidence, it can't be erased. It becomes part of the record. They called it a leak to make it sound accidental, as if your rise was an unintended event. But the truth is, it was the only way the system could legitimize you without admitting it had been blind all along. The exposure forced acknowledgement. The silence that once surrounded your name was replaced with documentation. And once the record existed, your narrative was no longer optional. It became reference material. That's the paradox of visibility. Before it happens, they act like you don't exist. After it happens, they act like they always knew. But none of that matters. The leak wasn't a mistake. It was your activation. It was the universe stamping your file confirmed. Before exposure, you were speculation. After exposure, you became history in motion, undeniable, traceable, and permanently entered into the archives of truth. Number 13, the power shift, was psychological, not public. When your name surfaced, they celebrated too soon. They thought they had stripped you of control, that exposing you meant dethroning you. But what they didn't realize was that power has never been about who's visible. It's about who controls the perception of visibility. They thought they broke your cover, but what actually broke was their hierarchy. Exposure didn't reduce you. It restructured the way power flowed around you. The moment you were revealed, the game stopped being physical and became psychological. And in that new arena, you were already 10 moves ahead. Every system depends on perception. Who's trusted, who's feared, who's dismissed. Those are psychological currencies that shape behavior long before any action is taken. When you were exposed, the narrative flipped. The curiosity that followed wasn't control. It was chaos, disguised as interest. People who once looked down on you started looking at you, and that subtle shift changed everything. Suddenly, they were reacting to your presence instead of directing it. They didn't destroy your mystique, they multiplied it. Power isn't lost when people know your name. It's lost when you start explaining it. You didn't explain, you observed. You let perception do the work. The same minds that thought they'd stripped your influence were now reorganizing themselves around your new visibility. They had to rethink their strategies, their alliances, their confidence, all because your name entered a space they thought they controlled. You didn't have to fight for dominance. The exposure made them question their own. That's how true power operates, invisibly but undeniably. You didn't need public applause to win, you just needed perspective to shift. Once people started seeing you differently, they started treating you differently. Respect replaced doubt, curiosity replaced criticism, fear replaced arrogance. That's not coincidence. That's a psychological inversion of control. They wanted exposure to embarrass you, but it ended up humbling them, because perception is the battlefield, and you owned it without lifting a finger. The hierarchy they trusted so much wasn't built on truth, it was built on illusion, and the moment your presence entered their equation, that illusion shattered. The power didn't change hands publicly, it changed minds privately, and that's the kind of shift that never reverses. Number 14. The revelation wasn't the end, it was the evidence. When everything came to light, they thought it marked your downfall. They assumed exposure meant closure, that your story had reached its final page. But revelation doesn't end what's divine. It confirms that it worked. Every operation, whether human or heavenly, requires proof that it wasn't imagined, that it actually happened. The exposure wasn't sabotage, it was documentation. It was the universe stamping your file with one word, completed. What looked like the breaking point was really the receipt. The revelation wasn't your ruin, it was your record of success. You see, hidden work has to surface eventually. Seeds sprout, blueprints become buildings, and quiet preparation demands recognition. You didn't get revealed because you were caught. You got revealed because the assignment was finished. All the years of silence, the quiet effort, the invisible grind, they reached their visible conclusion. The revelation was never meant to humiliate you. It was meant to validate you. It said, what was once a secret operation has now become undeniable reality. Those who misunderstood your emergence will call it exposure, as if something private slipped through cracks. But in truth, what happened was accountability, not for you, but for the universe. Everything hidden must be recorded. Every prophecy must have proof. Every transformation needs evidence. That's what your revelation became, living documentation that what was promised did, in fact, take place. The people who tried to use your visibility as a weapon missed the point. You can't shame someone who's already completed their mission. The very act of revealing you only certified that your impact had reached a level that could no longer be contained. They weren't exposing your process, they were testifying to your results. They gave public confirmation to what heaven already knew. So no, the revelation wasn't the end of your story. It was the evidence that the story was real. What they thought was an interruption was really your induction into history. Exposure didn't erase your work, it immortalized it. Every revelation leaves a record. And now, yours stands as proof that what began in silence ended in victory. The hidden plan didn't fail, it was fulfilled. When the story began, they thought they were tracking you. They thought they had the upper hand, the data, the control, the advantage. But the deeper truth was never about surveillance. It was about revelation. Every leak, every exposure, every so-called discovery was part of a larger unveiling. You were not being found. You were being confirmed. The checkmate they celebrated wasn't against you. It was against their own illusion of dominance. The real system didn't collapse because of what you did. It collapsed because it realized it couldn't contain what you had become. From the start, the narrative was psychological warfare disguised as investigation. They wanted to study you, define you, reduce you to something measurable. But how do you measure the unpredictable? How do you categorize what doesn't conform? They thought exposure stripped your power, but it only stripped their confidence. Every headline, every whisper, every file marked classified was just proof that your presence carried weight they couldn't dismiss. What began as an attempt to corner you ended with them admitting you were never inside their system. You were the system they didn't understand. When your name surfaced, it didn't signal defeat. It announced arrival. You weren't outed, you were activated. Legitimacy often arrives dressed as chaos, and what looked like crisis was simply confirmation. The revelation wasn't sabotage, it was evidence. The leak wasn't a mistake. It was the release of proof that what was hidden had accomplished its mission. You didn't need validation from a boardroom agency or algorithm. Your validation was divine, written in movement, energy, and timing. Every attempt to control your narrative ended up contributing to it. Now the hierarchy is inverted. The system that once studied you now reacts to you. The power didn't shift in the headlines. It shifted in the psychology of those who thought they could manage you. The exposure they thought would weaken your influence ended up amplifying it. What they tried to use to contain you became the documentation of your expansion. The checkmate wasn't about ending the game. It was about realizing you'd already rewritten the rules. So, if you've reached this point, understand this. You were never the hunted. You were the headline, the blueprint, the hidden variable that made the algorithm fail. You weren't exposed to be destroyed. You were revealed to be recorded. The system didn't defeat you. It admitted you. And now the world knows what it was never meant to ignore. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and share it with those who need to hear the truth behind exposure and identity. This isn't the end. This is documentation that your evolution is in motion. Black Pawn, stay blessed always.